In the vast and unforgiving waters of the Atlantic Ocean during World War II, German U-boats roamed beneath the surface as part of the Kriegsmarine's relentless campaign against Allied shipping. Among these was U-978, a Type VIIC submarine, which, though not as famous as some of her counterparts, carved out a unique place in naval history by completing the longest recorded underwater patrol of any submarine during the war. Her journey was not defined by destruction or death, but by endurance and the mastery of undersea stealth. U-978 was laid down on June 5, 1942, at the Blohm & Voss shipyard in Hamburg, one of Nazi Germany's most prolific U-boat construction facilities. She was launched nearly a year later, on April 1, 1943, and commissioned into service on May 12, 1943. Her first commander was Oberleutnant zur See Günther Pulst, a young officer who would go on to lead the boat through all of her active patrols. Like many submarines of the Type VIIC class, U-978 was a workhorse of the German fleet. Her crew complement ranged between 44 and 60 men. Like many U-boats, she bore a unique emblem on her conning tower, in U-978's case, a chirping red cartoon bird. It was a touch of levity in an otherwise grim service. After commissioning, U-978 joined the 5th U-boat flotilla for training, a standard step before entering active operations. Once her crew was prepared, she transferred to the 3rd U-boat flotilla on August 1, 1944, and then to the 11th flotilla in Bergen, Norway, a month later. Bergen would serve as her home port for the majority of her operational life. By this time in the war, the tides had turned against Germany. Allied advances in anti-submarine warfare, radar, sonar, and air patrols had made U-boat missions increasingly perilous. It was in this environment that U-978 was sent into action. Her first patrol was relatively uneventful, but it was her second patrol that would go down in history. On October 9, 1944, U-978 slipped out of Bergen and began what would become the longest continuous underwater patrol of the entire war. Thanks to the recently installed snorkel, a breathing apparatus that allowed diesel engines to operate while submerged at periscope depth, U-978 could remain underwater almost indefinitely as long as fuel, food, and morale held out. For 68 consecutive days, U-978 remained submerged, moving silently beneath the waves, avoiding detection and proving the effectiveness of the snorkel technology. She returned to Bergen on December 16, 1944, having completed this remarkable voyage. The underwater patrol was not merely an endurance exercise. On November 23, 1944, during this record-setting journey, U-978 scored her only confirmed kill. She torpedoed and sank the William D. Burnham, a 176-ton American Liberty ship, which was part of convoy TMC-44. The ship went down in the English Channel. While this was her only confirmed wartime success in terms of sinking enemy vessels, the patrol itself was considered a major operational achievement. To stay submerged for over 2 months in enemy-controlled waters and still return safely with a full crew demonstrated remarkable discipline and command. Life aboard U-978 during this submerged patrol must have been exceptionally challenging. The snorkel allowed the submarine to operate without surfacing, but it also brought complications. Operating at periscope depth meant the boat was constantly rocking with the waves. The air quality was poor, often filled with fumes from the diesel engines, and there were no opportunities for the crew to get fresh air or sunlight. Conditions were cramped, morale was tested, and the psychological strain of being hunted while unable to surface was intense. Yet Pulst and his men endured, and their success in this endeavor would later influence post-war submarine operations and design. After returning from her second patrol, U-978 was sent out one final time. On February 25, 1945, she departed Bergen for her third and last war patrol. The mission lasted 55 days, and by the time it concluded, the war was nearly over. On May 8, 1945, Germany unconditionally surrendered to the Allies. The next day, on May 9th, U-978 officially surrendered to Allied forces at Trondheim, Norway, without ever having suffered the loss of a single crew member during her operational life. Surrender stood in stark contrast to the fates of many other U-boats, which were destroyed in combat or scuttled by their crews. Following her surrender, U-978 was taken to Loch Ryan, Scotland, arriving there on May 29, 1945, as part of Operation Deadlight, the code name for the scuttling of surrendered German U-boats. The Allies had little use for the captured submarines and considered them a liability if left afloat. On December 11, 1945, U-978 was towed out to sea and deliberately sunk by torpedoes fired from a British submarine. She went down in the deep waters of the North Atlantic, ending her career not in a blaze of war, but as part of a planned post-war dismantling of the Kriegsmarine's once feared underwater fleet. In total, U-978 had completed 3 patrols and spent 133 days at sea. She sank 1 ship and saw no crew casualties, a rare and remarkable record for any submarine during World War II. But her true legacy was not in her tally of destroyed enemy ships. Rather, it was the quiet endurance of her 68-day submerged patrol that stood as her greatest accomplishment. That patrol demonstrated the potential of underwater stealth and hinted at the future of submarine warfare, where endurance, concealment, and patience would become more critical than brute force. U-978's story is a testament to the changing nature of naval warfare in the mid-20th century. Early in the war, U-boats had ruled the Atlantic, preying on unescorted merchant ships with impunity. But by 1944, Allied advancements in anti-submarine technology had turned the tide. Submarines had to evolve or die. The snorkel was one such evolution, a precursor to the air-independent propulsion systems of modern submarines. U-978 was one of the few boats to use it to full effect, proving that a submarine could vanish beneath the sea and remain there for months. Yet even with such technological adaptation, the war could not be won. U-978's final voyages took place against a backdrop of German defeat. Supplies were scarce, Allied air superiority was overwhelming, and the Kriegsmarine was being beaten back on every front. In this context, the endurance of U-978 and her crew becomes even more impressive. They operated in the shadows during a time when Germany's hopes were fading, and they did so with professionalism and discipline. Today, U-978 lies at the bottom of the Atlantic, like so many of her kind, but her story survives. She is remembered not for destruction, but for endurance, not for how many ships she sank, but for how long she could stay hidden. In a war that often glorified violence and aggression, U-978 reminds us that survival, silence, and patience were equally powerful weapons beneath the waves. She was not the deadliest nor the most decorated, but she was, in her own way, among the most remarkable submarines of the war.